A young woman went to the bus stop and vanished, only for her body to be found several kilometers away 2 days later. The police commenced an investigation but couldn't find a single clue or piece of evidence. For 38 years, the case remained unsolved until 2022, when innovative forensic technologies finally helped unravel this grim mystery. In this video, we will share what happened to Mary Jane Thompson and how science is changing the approach to solving such cases. Mary Jane Thompson was born on October 5, 1962 in Houston, Texas. She grew up in a close-knit, loving family and had many friends. Even in her school years, she decided she wanted to become a model. After graduation, she moved to Los Angeles to chase her dream. Later, she relocated to Dallas to take acting classes. At that time, she was 21 years old. To pay for rent and courses, Mary had to take on 2 jobs. She worked as a waitress and a florist, dedicating all her remaining time to her dream of becoming a model. She lived this busy lifestyle for about 6 months. On February 11, 1984, Mary called her mother and said she was going to the hospital due to a minor issue. She left for the hospital in the evening and had to take a bus from her apartment. When she got there, the hospital was closed and she had to wait for the bus to return home. That was the last time anyone saw Mary. She didn't contact her relatives, but they weren't quick to raise the alarm. Mary juggled 2 jobs with acting classes, so she often didn't have time to call her parents. 2 days later, the Dallas Police Department received a call. A body had been found near abandoned railroad tracks behind some warehouses. Detectives arriving at the scene found a young woman showing signs of strangulation. Identification documents revealed the victim to be Mary Jane Thompson. Medical experts examined the body and concluded she had been killed a few days earlier. At that time, the area was mostly warehouses, many of which were abandoned. This is why it took 2 days before anyone noticed. Experts also determined the cause of death was strangulation, with the unknown assailant using her own leggings. The assailant also assaulted Mary, allowing forensic experts to obtain his biological material. However, in 1984, this evidence was entirely useless. They couldn't even extract a DNA sample from it, much less identify the killer. Despite this, police were required to store such samples under laboratory conditions, hoping that advancements in technology would eventually allow them to solve cases like this. Investigators found no clues at the crime scene. The warehouse where her body was found was about 5 kilometers from the hospital, in a desolate industrial area. By talking to Mary's friends and family, investigators were able to piece together a rough timeline of events. Mary should have walked a certain distance to the bus stop to head home after finding the clinic closed. It appears the assailant attacked her there, then loaded her into a vehicle and took her to the location where her body was found. Lacking any solid leads, investigators turned their attention to previously convicted men living and working in the area, but this line of investigation yielded no results. Police believed the killer was familiar with the area. He not only managed to abduct Mary unnoticed, but also drove her to the secluded railroad tracks hidden from view by warehouses. There were also no witnesses who had seen Mary Jane that evening. Surveillance cameras didn't exist back then, except on major city streets. Thus, the case quickly hit a dead end. It was handed over to the Unsolved Homicide Unit, which was supposed to periodically revisit such investigations. This happened 25 years later, in 2009. The Dallas Police Department decided to reopen the case using new technologies. Experts managed to extract a DNA sample from the biological material found on Mary Jane's body, but their luck ended there. The sample was run through all available databases, but there was no match. This suggested that the perpetrator had never been convicted of serious crimes before, or their DNA wasn't collected during the years when such procedures weren't standard. Detectives had only one option left: to periodically run the sample through databases, hoping the perpetrator would be caught for another crime. Such occurrences happen frequently, enabling investigators to solve even the most hopeless cases. The case was reopened again 9 years later, in 2018. Detective Noah Camacho sought help from an independent organization focused on solving violent crimes and developing various tools and measures to reduce such incidents. Together with the detectives, they tried to secure more resources for Mary's case necessary for conducting the latest DNA research. 2 years later, in 2020, the FBI joined the investigation. By then, the Bureau had accumulated a vast number of old, unsolved cases with DNA samples from perpetrators, but no suspects. With advancements in technology, these cold cases gain significant potential for resolution through genetic genealogy. This technology, which emerged relatively recently, has become a true breakthrough in forensic science. Here's how it works. Specialists examine a DNA sample from an unknown individual using state-of-the-art equipment. Based on the obtained data, they form a profile that can help find the person's relatives. Family members' DNA can enter databases in several ways. Firstly, they might be criminals themselves and thus be included in the FBI database. Secondly, these individuals might voluntarily add their DNA to public databases intended for finding relatives or establishing their ancestry. These services have become particularly popular in recent years, much to the benefit of detectives. In the case of Mary Jane's murder, the search took 2 years. Initially, experts found her distant relatives through a DNA sample, which was just the beginning. They had to study the biographies of thousands of people, eliminate those who didn't match, and pinpoint the most likely suspect. Elimination is based on factors like age and residence at the time of the murder. The situation is further complicated because DNA databases only point experts to a certain group of relatives but do not provide their DNA samples for comparison. The only way forward is to identify the best candidate and obtain their DNA. In 2022, detectives received a name from the experts, a man who could be Mary Jane's killer. They studied his biography and decided to follow him. At the right moment, police obtained an item from which they could extract a DNA sample. Laboratory analysis confirmed that his DNA matched the sample found on Mary Jane. The suspect was 60-year-old Edward Morgan from Dallas. As suspected by the police, he lived near the crime scene just a kilometer away. At the time of the murder, he was only 22 years old. In February, Morgan was arrested and charged with murder. He is currently in custody awaiting trial, with bail set at $500,000. The police have not disclosed any details about his life, which will become known only during the trial. One thing is certain though, the biological material found on the victim's body matches his DNA completely. Investigators expressed confidence at a press conference that Morgan would be found guilty and face punishment. For such a crime in Texas, he faces the death penalty. Unfortunately, Mary Jane's parents did not live to see this moment. Her father, who fought for justice for his daughter until his last breath, passed away in 2020, and her mother even earlier. Mary Jane's closest surviving relative is her sister, who was shocked by the police call. After 38 years, a detective told her they finally knew the killer's identity and had arrested him. On social media, she frequently wrote about Mary Jane, wishing her a happy birthday and expressing her undying hope for the case to be solved. Upon learning of Edward Morgan's arrest, she wished him a life behind bars. She also promised to attend every court session until the final verdict was reached. Thus, genetic genealogy opens previously unimaginable opportunities for detectives. Before this innovation, police had to rely on evidence or witnesses to find criminals. Having a DNA sample never guaranteed that the culprit would be found. But now, experts can identify even the most distant relatives from the smallest sample, ultimately determining the individual's identity. The only current limitation is the restricted size of DNA databases. Despite being able to identify several thousand relatives based on one person's data, it is still not enough. However, science continues to advance, and in the near future, we may see technologies that can easily identify anyone from a single DNA sample. Already, experts can create a rough portrait of the DNA owner, and this field is just beginning to develop. Share your thoughts on this story in the comments, and don't forget to like this post to help its promotion.